Dr. Michelle Haslam, thanks so much for coming on to Talk Beliefs. Now, you're a clinical psychologist based right here in the UK, and you are an ex-member of the Buddhist sect, the new Kadampa Tradition, or NKT. So how are you doing this stormy British afternoon?
I'm good, thank you, Mark. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, not too bad. We had quite a torment out there. I know it was affecting both our internets, but I think we're good to go now.
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Right. People will be interested to hear that you were a clinical psychologist before you joined the new Kadampa Tradition. So what was it about this group that appealed to you as a psychologist?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's probably worth being clear that I was not doing very well when I became involved with the NKT. So I was looking for a sense of community and support. And I'd lived in an intentional community in the past and really enjoyed it. And I found out that you could live in NKT Dharma centres. And I thought, well, everyone will be taking quite a lot of personal responsibility because they'll be meditating. And through my profession, I'd heard that there were lots of great benefits in practicing meditation. So I didn't know a lot about Buddhism. I'd been to a few classes, just introductory classes, which they kind of market as kind of stress relief and relaxation. And they're not actually, they don't include much of the doctrine in those classes. So I hadn't actually seen many warning signs. But there are actually lots of therapists and psychologists who are drawn to Western Buddhism. I've also been involved with Triratna in the past, which used to be called the FWBO. And there were lots of therapists around. And I think, it's because we get drawn into the mindfulness movement, and also therapists and psychologists are used to thinking about being kind to others and benefiting others. So it's quite common, actually.
That's a word we hear a lot, mindfulness, isn't it? But
sure.
How would you describe that?
Yeah, so actually, a lot of the Buddhist groups advertise themselves as teaching mindfulness, but really their aim is to teach you the doctrine. But if you go along to an introductory class, you'll be told that it's just mindfulness. So the NKT don't practice mindfulness. That's actually deception. But other groups, so for example, Triratna, they do lead brief mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the body, meditations, but that's only part of what they teach. So, I mean, mindfulness really is, according to Western definitions, it's supposed to be about just watching thoughts and feelings come and go, and not trying to change them. But in Buddhist groups, they do practice trying to be happier more of the time. So it's not mindfulness.
Okay, before we go into some depth about what the group teaches, can you talk about the structure of the group and what one would expect if he or she were to join, and also about the leader, because there's quite a mysterious guru at the center of it all, isn't there?
There is, yeah. So they have centers all over the world, really, and branches, and you can go along to what's called a general program class, which is once a week normally. That's like introductory, where they just talk about stress relief and breathing meditation. And they don't really mention enlightenment or being reborn in a hell realm, or more of the doctrine that would be perhaps more dogmatic. They do practice a prayer at the beginning, which does talk about enlightenment and things like that. But that's it, really. So you can go along to a weekly class. They also have festivals, which are basically like intense retreats, really. And some people live in the centres, so they pay rent in order to live there, or they work for the centre and then they don't pay rent. And they also run day courses, sort of half day or full day courses, on an aspect of their teachings, which they say is modern Buddhism. I would argue that it's not either of those things. Kelsang Gyatso, I'm not the expert on him or the history of the NKT, and I tend to sometimes make mistakes, but I'm trying to learn about it all. So Kelsang Gyatso hasn't been seen since 2013. The followers believe that he is an enlightened being, so that he's the third living Buddha. So they believe that he's omniscient. And but actually, he didn't even complete his Geshe exams, and he was expelled from his monastery. And the senior members, they claim that he's in writing retreat, and that's why he's never seen. But ex-members believe that it's actually the senior members who've been writing the last few books and claiming that they're by Kelsang Gyatso. So most of us believe that he's either got a degenerative illness or he's actually dead already. But I think the management know that once the guru dies, people leave or they don't join. So they control the narrative by saying that he's in writing retreat. And they often claim that he can't appear because he would be at risk of assassination. So they claim that they can't secure the perimeter enough for him to attend the festivals. But this is really just a persecution complex that makes people feel paranoid and instills a phobia in them of the outside world, in my opinion.
And it also elevates him as a special being. If when you can't see him, you sort of imagine him as being all the more superhuman, yes. I suppose.
I would argue that it's elevated him to an even more mystical, magical position. So there was a lot of awe and infatuation with him. And they do believe that his way is the only way. And the NKT, they're known for starting sentences with Geshe says. And actually, in the notes on teaching skills for NKT teachers, it says, all we need is Geshe says. So what happens is people go around, they learn the books word for word, only his books are available. And because he removed all the other books by the other authors from the bookshops. And you're also told it's not a good idea to mix traditions. And so they learn these books word for word. And so what happens is people go around repeating the teachings in this kind of parrot-like fashion. And it means that they are kind of highly indoctrinated.
Michelle, what exactly is it that the group teaches and how does it advertise itself? Now, I know you've spoken about something called spiritual bypassing, I think it is. So perhaps we can touch on that as well.
Yeah. So let's start with their claims. So they claim that they teach mindfulness and meditation and modern Buddhism. Okay. So really, they're just riding on the wave of the mindfulness movement in order to get more people to part with their money, in my opinion, and to spread the doctrine. So they actually teach thought stopping, thought control, and emotion control. So in the beginners classes, where they try and keep it a bit like mindfulness and breathing meditation, the National Spiritual Director in the UK, where I lived, she would lead it as a thought-stopping activity. So she would say, now stop thinking about your family, your friends, your problems. And so it was actually a prompt, and then you would be told to stop thinking about it, which makes it harder than if you're not prompted. So this is not actually mindfulness, this is thought stopping. And then what usually happens is that breathing meditation, it's not even breathing meditation, it's thought stopping, is used to settle the mind before you focus on an aspect of the teachings. So the purpose is really for you to become relaxed and more susceptible. And but of course the buildings are lovely and it's quite a sort of retreat type experience, and so you might feel more relaxed and you might feel that you're benefiting because you're getting a break from your ordinary life. There's quite a serene environment, there's a cafe,
so all the details, huh?
yeah so then what they teach is something called contemplation meditation. So they focus on an aspect of the teaching in the doctrine. For example, the idea that all living beings have been your mother in a past life. So they believe in a mental continuum that passes between rebirths. And so they don't understand mental health at all. They don't understand trauma. They don't understand the fight and flight response, but they do advertise themselves as offering courses for overcoming depression and anxiety, but they don't understand depression or anxiety. They're just using that to get people to attend. So they actually attract people with mental health difficulties through their advertising. So when you're focusing on an aspect of the teaching, I would argue that this is actually guided self-hypnosis and not contemplation meditation. So you're instructed to keep the aspect of the teaching in mind and focus on that and not allow your attention to wander away from that aspect of the teaching. And then you're encouraged to reduce that intellectual concept into an emotional experience and to focus on that emotion. So the teachings are meant to make you feel good, basically, or to dissociate from your body, something that's in line with the teaching. And in order to change the way it's thought reform and emotion control.
And people often associate feeling good with something actually working, don't they? Yeah.
And the tricky thing is that you may feel nice because you are in a nice environment and you're focusing on something that might feel pleasant to you. For example, if you're feeling like you're receiving these blessings from Buddha and Buddha loves you, and maybe it doesn't feel like anyone else loves you, you can get initial benefits. And the spiritual bypassing, which you mentioned earlier. Yeah. So what the aim is that these teachings become an automatic part of your thinking, and the feelings associated with that become an automatic part of your experience. And they consider that the more this occurs, the more likely it is that you'll have a more fortunate rebirth. So basically, you're supposed to always be feeling happy and positive and focused on something virtuous or pure.
All the time.
All the time, yes. So
not difficult at all.
Highly damaging in the long term, but in the short term, you can feel better because you're avoiding feeling painful feelings. I mean, that's still very difficult because research shows that to kind of focus on other thoughts, you've actually got to hold the original thought in mind, stop it, and then try and focus on something else. The evidence suggests that that's actually really difficult, but even if you kind of manage to do it, it is psychologically damaging in the long term. So, for example, in the NKT, they believe that you should not feel jealous because you should be rejoicing in someone else's joy. So when you feel jealousy coming on, you're supposed to focus on how wonderful it is that this other person is happy.
Right.
But the trouble is that you might be feeling something for a really important reason. So you might be jealous because they're in a healthy relationship and you know that you're in an abusive relationship. So if you just rejoice in their happiness and you don't address anything that's going on for you, then you can stay in abusive situations and end up with sort of learned helplessness and hopelessness and depression. But at first, unfortunately, what happens is, and this happened to myself, even though I'm a psychologist, I did do some spiritual bypassing because I was heartbroken and depressed when I became involved. And so I didn't want to be feeling that. And it's really common that people move into these centres when they've had a relationship breakdown or an experience of homelessness, because you can claim benefits and live there. So, and if you're lonely, there can initially feel like there's a sense of community. So what happens is you get told that that this is wisdom and you're practicing, ancient methods for attaining happiness. And before you know it, you're being hypnotized. And I did actually become partially indoctrinated. So I wouldn't say I was fully indoctrinated. I never met Kelsang Gyatso, so I never experienced a sort of infatuation with him. Whereas members who've been around a long time, they would experience and believe a lot more of the Geshe says stuff. But I still did have a go at a lot of the practices, and I still did become... I was affected by all the talk of the blessings and the purity and how you're doing it for the benefit of all living beings, even though I didn't believe in rebirth. So unfortunately, if you're not in a great place and you want to be feeling less emotion because you're overwhelmed by your emotion or traumatized, it's very easy to convince you to spiritually bypass what you're feeling. The NKT believe in something called the Self-Cherishing Mind. So they believe there's a part of the mind, it's what you would call your ego, really. So like all cults that aim to destroy your ego, they believe that the more you focus on these teachings and the more you practice, the more you'll destroy your self-cherishing mind. So there's a lot of self-annihilation, really. So they practice seeing your body as empty of inherent existence. So you practice pointing at different parts of your body and sort of saying, where is it? And who am I? And what? And so what happens is people are actually dissociating from their body and from their emotions. They don't practice mindfulness of the body or anything that is grounded in the body. So you're actually, if you've got complex trauma, you probably already dissociate a little bit. So people who come along and are practicing this, they're likely to dissociate further. But because the teachings repeatedly tell you that this is wise and pure and it's wisdom and compassion, and you're terribly fortunate, it can twist your trauma to seem spiritual and impressive instead of what it really is, which is dissociation.
Almost like the trauma was necessary.
Well, they also believe that suffering is what brings you to the Dharma. So that can help people make meaning out of their trauma. So, you know, I've had all these disappointments, life lets me down. I should just practice renunciation because I just keep grasping after things that are worldly and they don't last and they're impermanent. And so if you've had lots of disappointments in life, or you feel abandoned and lonely, then it's just encouraging you to kind of develop a fear of intimacy, really. But it's giving it a spiritual twist to make it seem special and pure and virtuous and helping you towards achieving enlightenment. And I know people who are still in the group and they're very sincere practitioners, and they honestly believe that they are helping the entire world by trying to annihilate themselves. But because they were already traumatized, that just seems normal to them, and now they've got a spiritual reason to keep doing it. So it's quite masochistic.
Yeah.
And I would also argue that it's quite narcissistic, because you believe that you are becoming, you're closer to reaching enlightenment and you're having spiritual realizations instead of recognizing your trauma.
Well, you finally decided to leave the sect and began speaking out, making YouTube videos, creating a website, talking about your experiences in the group. And the group immediately began to hit back, didn't they?
Yeah, so I left when I started to experience spiritual abuse. So people were using the teachings to try and manipulate me. What happens is they have abuse enabling and minimizing teachings. So the idea that your abuser is actually your teacher, and therefore you should be grateful and you should see them as perfect. And this is a problem throughout Buddhist groups. It's the crazy wisdom idea that the guru has wisdom that you can't possibly understand, and they might be trying to teach you when they're abusing you. And you're supposed to just see them as an enlightened being, so you can't question their behavior. And I also saw that a lot of the residents and the teachers were having sex with volunteers, and there was nothing in place. The volunteers, they're far away from home, they don't have transport usually, they're under the control of the management volunteering, and there was nothing in place, no recognition of the power imbalances. So you could go along to a teaching and be having sex with the teacher, no problems. I've since learnt that even the supposedly celibate monks, that this has happened, and that they were using tantric ideas to have sex with their followers, suggesting that having sex with them was somehow more spiritual. So I didn't know about this in the group. I heard about it when I left and I read testimonies, because I realized, well, if psychological abuse is possible, and I reported this psychological abuse to the management and the resident teacher, and I was minimized and gaslighted. I was told that my practice, it was enduring suffering.
Right.
And I came to realize that there were absolutely no consequences for abusers. So I left, and then I read testimonies, and they were really disturbing. And I just couldn't believe what I'd actually been involved in. So I started making YouTube videos, and at first I didn't really talk about abuse. I spoke about recovery. The fact that the group is damaging was kind of implied, but I was mainly speaking about recovery. And some of the other survivors had made videos already, and they seemed to be okay. So I thought, well, that would be fine then. But I underestimated how much they would be threatened by me because of my qualifications. So because I'm a clinical psychologist, I can explain a lot of the concepts and my experience, and I can articulate it. Whereas a lot of the other ex-members, they're so traumatized and confused, and they're still experiencing doubting their own perception and their own intuition, that they can't describe it that well, or they're so afraid of the NKT that they just go underground and disappear. So I started making these videos, but when I actually started saying that this group is damaging, which happened eventually because I just felt like I couldn't hold it in anymore, that's when, at first it was trolling. So they set up programs to dislike my videos instantly as soon as they were live. I called them out on it. They took it off. I started to receive some absolutely insidious, awful trolling, saying that it was all in my mind, that I was paranoid. They pretended they had fake concern for me, but the trolling was clearly abuse. They always claim that ex-members are crazy. That's what all cults do, really. But it's even more possible in a Buddhist group because of the belief that you're creating your own reality with your mind. Then when you leave and you say, hey, this is an abusive group, they just tell you, well, abuse is all in your mind. So actually you're just basically imagining it, or it's because of your own narcissism that you're seeing narcissism in others. So I received a lot of this trolling and some supportive, lovely comments from ex-members as well. And then I began writing a document because I was speaking to other people through YouTube and they were giving me feedback. I was learning what was going on, and it was helping me to validate my own experience and my perception and go, okay, it is like that. And so I started writing about it. So I wrote my report. I called it Initially. And the day after it went viral, my workplace received an email from somebody claiming to be an experimental psychologist, who is clearly a member of the NKT, a senior member, perhaps even a few of them working as a team.
You probably knew this by the way it was worded, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. So they claim it's the fake concern. So they claim to be concerned for my mental state. And they forwarded my boss some of my videos where I'm taking the piss sitting on the toilet pretending to be the guru. That clearly pissed them off. They claimed that I was basically having a mental breakdown and that I wasn't suitable for my role. Unfortunately, this pissed me off so much and triggered me that I shared the email on social media to expose them, basically, because it was clear that they were using a fake identity and trying to get me fired and discredit me. So, but when I did that, unfortunately, I broke the data protection policy at my workplace for sharing emails, even though the email was about me and it was fake. So, and because I was a contractor, I don't get the same rights as a permanent member of staff. And what normally would have been a warning, well, basically I had to be released from my contract. And by this point, I was actually quite unwell because of the stress and because I had some PTSD symptoms. And so, unfortunately, through entrapment, really, it did actually work. And it's very hard not to react to their abuse. And I've been told that by previous members as well.
I think they've got a hate website for you as well, don't they?
I'm just about to tell you about that. Yeah. So a few weeks later, they then set up drmichellehaslam.com. Using this same fake identity, they claimed that, again, they really went to a ridiculous extent to make out that I'm just crazy, basically. They read my PhD thesis. They found out the name of my dad and his death in order to claim that I had trauma in the first place because my dad died when I was a teenager. They claimed that I was jealous because I'd been in a relationship within the group. They claimed all sorts of things. They also tore apart my report at the same time, which obviously someone who was actually concerned for my mental state would not be interested in this document that I'd released. So they make it very clear that it's them and that it's a character assassination website. So, and they actually...
It reminds me a lot of Scientology, actually, because they have this thing called the fair game policy, don't they? And it reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah. So I would say that the NKT do practice fair game. They don't have a policy, but the senior members do work together to destroy former members. They've had funeral brochures sent to their parents with their name on. Yeah, really sick things that they've done. But because they use fake identities and it's impossible to prosecute, they get away with it. So they also threaten legal action. So when I released the email on social media, they also threatened my workplace with legal action. Apparently they sent pages of relentless emails threatening my workplace. Again, making it very clear that it's them. Other people who've tried to write books, they've been silenced by legal threats. So, yeah, I would say that the NKT is the Scientology of Buddhism.
Michelle, I know that mental health professionals often have no problem at all in sending patients to Buddhism classes, but you're not exactly convinced that that's a good idea.
No, I'm not. No, we should not be recommending religion for mental health problems. And that applies to Buddhism as much as it does any other religion. Unfortunately, there are lots of arguments that people have for why Buddhism might be good for your mental health. The trouble is that there are many indoctrinated people working in mental health or publishing papers on mindfulness who are also Buddhists. So there's also the argument that, you know, if you just practice mindfulness, then you might be a mindful sociopath. But you need to practice ethics and compassion to make you nicer. So there's lots of reasons why at the moment people still have this view that Buddhism is good for your mental health. They practice dissociation and they worship gurus who have abused people and created personality cults. And there's many reasons why this could traumatize you. So in the beginning, it might feel good, though, because you found a sense of community. The community tells you that you've got fortunate karma or you found something wonderful. And you might get some initial soothing benefits from some of the practices, which is a bit like a stabilization phase of an intervention. So you can at first feel better. So Mind, the mental health charity in the UK, recommend you go check out your local Buddhist meditation class. Quite a few of us have been in contact with them now to say that this is not appropriate. You are basically making vulnerable people with more trauma than average vulnerable to recruitment by suggesting this. But unfortunately, they don't understand that Buddhism can be a cult. So, and they say, well, lots of our clients tell us that it has helped them. And the thing is, it might in the beginning, people might say, oh, this is really helping me, because it's a community and they're getting some initial benefits, and because spiritual bypassing can feel good. Also, it can make you more narcissistic, and that feels good too. So I met lots of people, both in the NKT and Triratna, who were malignant narcissists, who believed that they were achieving spiritual realizations permanently. And then I would see them do something that indicated that they had less empathy and emotional intelligence than average. But because the group is telling you that you're on a path, you start to believe it. And this actually did happen to me to some extent as well, in that I can see now where I became a little bit more narcissistic, even though I didn't believe in enlightenment. So, and I've met many people now in Western Buddhism, the people who comment on my YouTube, for example, some of them aren't NKT members. They can be incredibly patronizing and condescending because they think that they are thinking in line with ultimate truths and that you are not, you're ignorant. So actually, yes, people might report that it's helping them, but that doesn't mean that it's healthy. And also, all of these groups, the Buddhist groups, have an abuse history that's hidden or whitewashed. So if they're preaching unconditional love to you and acceptance and all those things, and then you find out that actually people have been severely harmed and you've been deceived, you can develop really severe betrayal trauma. Because the group is talking about that they're preaching about taking responsibility and honesty and all those things, but their actions show that they have not been living in line with this. Because unfortunately, the worship of the leader takes priority over the well-being of the members. So if you disclose abuse, you're likely to just be gaslighted. So if you're practicing, say, for example, a compassionate or loving kindness meditation that's not particularly Buddhist, you're not thinking of Buddha, but you're, I don't know, imagining kind of warmth and love coming towards you, this can have great benefits to you. Say, for example, if you didn't have a compassionate figure in your childhood, you need to draw upon some kind of source of feeling loved. That there is evidence that compassionate mind meditations can help people. But that compassionate figure needs to be one that cannot betray you or lie to you or abuse you or exploit you. So if you give your mind up like that to a guru whose entourage have obscured horrendous atrocities, then I cannot even begin to describe the betrayal trauma. It is horrendous. You know, I'm not even one of the most extreme cases. You know, I was only involved for 18 months. I wasn't ordained. I had a full-time job. But the people who have given up their old lives and they've even taken on a name from the guru, and they don't have anything to go back to anymore. Like some of these people don't have a career. You know, they've burnt bridges with family and friends, some of them. Then and they take vows to give up their future lives, if they believe in that, not just this life, for the benefit of all living beings, to train according to their guru's doctrine to achieve enlightenment. And then they find out that the people at the top are completely incapable of taking responsibility and will do anything to try and control the narrative. Then that kind of betrayal trauma, you know, it has led some people to kill themselves. And yeah, so there are actually many risks that are associated with being involved with a Buddhist group. And it's not all about love, compassion, and kindness. But unfortunately, Westerners are still really naive when it comes to Buddhism. Obviously, the NKT, it is an extremist group, and it is, I would argue, the most dangerous Buddhist cult. But, you know, all of them really, they do gaslight people into doubting their own mind, their own thoughts, their own feelings. So, yeah, I would argue that we need to work harder to spread awareness that, first of all, that they don't teach mindfulness. And secondly, if they do teach mindfulness, it's with an agenda to focus on the rest of the doctrine. And also to be aware that Buddhism is a religion. It's not just a system of training the mind. It's not some kind of secular science of the mind. You know, it is dogma. And unfortunately, it just keeps getting watered down and sold to people as mindfulness or as answers to their mental health problems. And there aren't yet enough studies on meditation that report adverse effects. So, yeah, there are not enough robust studies that have actually asked people if they experienced adverse effects from any of the practices. And the groups advertising, they just tell you that you will achieve happiness through practicing their practices. They don't warn you of any possible side effects like dissociation, acute psychosis, none of it. So, yeah, it's really important that we spread the word in letting people know that there are risks.
Wow, that was really intriguing stuff. And thank you so much for speaking out about this, Michelle. I'll leave links to your website and YouTube channel in the description below. And hopefully we'll catch up with you again in the very near future.
Very welcome, Mark. Thanks for having me on.